This episode was recorded on March 17th, 2026. Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Kravchuk.
I wish I had a funny tidbit or neat little story for you, but the world is depressing right now. So if you have a funny story that made you chuckle this week, please leave it in the comments.
Yeah, and on the, sort of depressing note, we're going to be talking about AI and warfare. Yay!
Yay.
But specifically, we're going to be looking at the DoD-Anthropic Standoff, spat, whatever you want to call it, which has resulted in Anthropic being designated a supply chain security risk by the U.S. government.
Oh, wow. How did that happen?
They just said you're a supply chain security risk because that's all it takes these days. And one thing that we did want to mention here as well is that while we want to talk about this, it's not just like a rehash of the news. We're wanting to take this more as a case study in an approach that we use when thinking about how actors of this level, so like governments or, super rich, powerful people or very large corporations, conduct themselves, and like how to make sense of it with this as an example.
Yes. And you did say they just declared it, but there was a little bit of, let's say, foreplay before they declared it, right?
Well, yeah, I just meant in terms of why it has happened, why the designation exists. Like, I guess the government, the U.S. government, can just once they decide that that is how it goes. But in terms of like the timeline, I guess the first thing to note would be if you want a more in-depth version, there's a really good article, which we'll link in the show notes, from techpolicy.press, where they go through this in much more extensive detail, including citations and all that stuff. So check that out if you're actually interested. But we'll give like the very high level Cliff Notes version.
That Cliff Notes version starts with kind of the Maduro raid. Was that the earliest event?
Yeah, so this is also based on that article. But it seems like that was really the catalyst for this, is that there were rumors and then confirmation that Claude, or some systems leveraging Claude, was used for aspects of the Maduro raid operation. And following that, Hegseth also made some claims about how the military is only going to use AI that lets them fight wars, and referenced the no woke AI, which is just, I guess, a real name for the thing that was put out by the U.S. government. But yeah, so he got a little bit upset about that in the aftermath. And since then, it seems to be clear that it was because there were some issues with Claude.
Just being probably some refusals or some limitations that were actually enforced.
Right. And so, I guess my assumption is that this was also like the first larger scale example of Project Maven, which is the software as a service platform that is provided by Palantir to the Department of Defense. And that is, running Claude as part of its workflow. So my guess is that that is sort of where this came from. But anyways, after sort of another month after that, a month and a half after that, on February 16th, the Pentagon threatens to designate Anthropic a supply chain risk. So this is just them saying, hey, you better comply. But then,
Then Entropic complied.
no. So then another like 8 days or whatever passed, and it was February 24th. At that point, I think that was either the day of or the day after Dario Amodei actually went to meet with them. And at that point, Hegseth threatens either the Defense Production Act to compel Anthropic to comply. So this is national. We're going to nationalize your technology. You're not going to have a say, or designate them a supply chain risk, and then they wouldn't be allowed to be involved. If they
Which
didn't,
even at this moment, I think it's important to note that threatening both of these at the same time is something to put a pin on.
yeah.
And we will not get into it right now, but this put a pin into that fact.
And so they give him an ultimatum. Ultimatum rolls around. Anthropic rejects it. Then they are announced as the supply chain risk is the one that they went with. And then the lawsuit began on March 9th. So this is all like very much a developing story, but those are the important beats.
Okay, so this leaves us here now with Anthropic officially being a supply chain risk, and presumably other stuff still ongoing in the background.
Yeah.
But like, what was the public reaction? And maybe like before we get to that, what was your reaction as all of this unfolded?
Yeah, so I was actually at ICI when this was unfolding, and so that was an interesting place to be because it was one of the more policy centric conferences within this sort of AI space at all, and so we had people that from all over the world, and so there are some people that know about it, some people that don't, some people talking about it, some people not talking about it, but that was an interesting place to be. And when I learned about it, my first thought was just like, I'm surprised. I really did not expect Anthropic to hold.
Before we go into that, what is ICI?
International Association for Safe and Ethical AI. It is a conference. This past year, it was in France, in Paris. I was just presenting some work there. But the important part here is that I was surprised. I mean, maybe you can just share what your thoughts were, and then we can talk about it.
For me, I was like genuinely like very happily surprised because I'm a very cynical person in regards to mega corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Or I wouldn't call myself cynical. Actually, there's a difference between being cynical and being realistic, and you should try to be
Yeah.
realistic and not cynical. We will get to that as well. But normally, you don't see genuine, like full-on resistance like this unless forced. And Anthropic did already collaborate with the US government on warfare and related things. So this
Yeah.
was a genuine surprise. Even if it's like a late line, it is like a welcome line.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like the reason that I think, at least like my prior, I guess, is that they would have caved is that like it's pretty well established that Palantir is a completely unethical operation, not just the people in charge, but also the products they provide, and the way that they do business. Like there's so many issues, and
Proudly enabling warfare and domestic surveillance.
yes, and I mean, even recently, I think like within the past week or so of recording this, the CEO mentioned that like expansive use of AI would delegitimize educated individuals, especially women, or something like that. Which is like, okay, great. Thanks for thanks for sharing that. I guess we already knew, but now the quiet part's been said out loud. Anyways, the line that Anthropic has drawn has come after saying that Claude is allowed to be used in Palantir's products and making agreements with the Department of Defense. And again, since this has sort of been coming out, well, I guess since this started, but not since this has been coming out, the war in Iran began, and it has become apparent that there was a strike on a girls' school in Iran. And based on the evidence we have, I think it is highly likely that Project Maven was used in the selection of that target. And so effectively, then, Anthropic's line comes after tightening the kill chain, in the words of Palantir. That's what they would say. Um, loosening oversight, and as a result, bombing a girls' school.
But it's not as simple as just saying, "Oh, Anthropic is good now," as for example, Timnit Gebru pointed out in a LinkedIn post.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, um, because like obviously you're seeing this sort of outpouring of support, because
Anthropic put up the bare minimum of resistance and put like a red line of saying, "Hey, we want you to." The specific red lines that we know about were, "We want you to not do human out of the loop, fully autonomous weapons,
mhm,
and you can't use our systems for mass surveillance of American citizens."
yes,
Which
and then
specifically means that I am okay to mass surveil, but Jacob is not.
that is correct. Although arguably, then your government would have something to say about it, and if their security was good enough, they would just prevent it. But anyways, the response that like the DoD then has, that Hegseth has, is like, oh, well, we didn't want to do anything illegal with it. It's like, okay. You're not going to define the things that you want to do with it as illegal, but everything that there's so many things that you've done that are illegal that you've changed the rules for or just ignored the rules for, that like actually we should trust that you would do something illegal based on precedent set. Um, Regardless, though, like Timnit's post was referencing when Elon Musk and Trump had their little spat, and how people also back then sort of jumped on the like pro Elon trend, less of an extent than I would say people jumped on the pro Anthropic trend in this case. Um, but it still holds, and the thing that she was pointing out, which I think is very valid, is that um, we shouldn't be lauding a corporation or individual or actor that is behaving in their own self-interest, and because it's convenient for them, uh, they sort of play it off as being part of their values, but really they're just taking advantage of like public sentiment, I guess, and passing off their behavior in that moment as more general than it actually is.
Yeah, and like I think we should link Timnit's or Dyer's, we should say, Tescrel bundle and Mr. AI Hype Theater 3000 as resources there to explain where Timnit is coming from. But I would summarize like the post as like the enemy of my enemy is the enemy of my enemy, nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
And criticizing people who go, "Oh, now that they're fighting, this is now the good guy. We need to support them." And morally, I fully agree with her basically. But there's also like a different way of looking at it, which is like a more pragmatist viewpoint, and that's kind of what we're gonna be go for. Which like people use pragmatic as like reasonable. That's not how we're using this here. The philosophical thing of pragmatism is just looking at things as being because you have a goal. There's like actions that you're trying to do, and whatever you're doing is like serving a specific goal. And if your goal is to do whatever, and for that you now want to figure out how to assess Anthropic and what they're doing and how to interpret it, that's the playbook, the stuff we want to break down in this episode. And not only Anthropic, also any other like multinational corporation, any like large, powerful entity where you don't get to take things at face value because they lie or they have an interest in behaving in a certain way. And so even though they themselves will fully believe the story that they're selling, that story can change on a dime as is convenient. So like individuals, this would be like a narcissistic behavior. For corporations, it's just the way they are. But like
Hmm.
systems will change. And
So that would mean then like the first thing that we're thinking about is motivations. I guess is sort of a way to put this. Like what, and you can't think about all potential motivations ever that a organization or actor or whatnot could have, but we can think about them in buckets. Um,
yeah, it's kind of like if you want to figure out like I want to prepare for whatever happens with AI now, or I want to pick where I direct my employer's AI budget as a technical person. One thing that you can use to make the choice, like the actions that you're trying to do, is to understand the motivation of the actor to and see how they align with your goals, your motivations, because then it's safer to use them. Where like Russia famously used SpaceX for communications, and the motivation of a US based entity is gonna be kind of clashing with Russia right now. So that's like a thing to avoid, and figuring out why Anthropic is behaving the way they are is this first step.
so what what would you say like the most interesting or valuable buckets to start with are, at least in this case?
The big buckets I would point out is like intrinsic motivation, rational self-interest, and like realpolitik, where intrinsic motivation is often a bit underestimated, but like a lot of people's behavior is because of like what they actually believe in, or like what like genuinely motivates them.
Hmm.
And often you earlier I said you can't take them at face value, but sometimes you can.
Yeah, you
And
couldn't take
there's
Igor at face value when he said that.
but sometimes you can, because there's nuance to that statement, right? Like you shouldn't take people literally and stop thinking. But like, for example, Trump, a lot of the problems we're having is because people don't take him literally. Where like if he says
Yeah.
I will do a crazy thing, people go like, "Oh no, he's just bluffing." It's like, "No, he will do the crazy thing."
Yeah, at this point he's like it's been very well established like nah, he'll just do the crazy thing. And so that's why it's so crazy that like people tolerate it when he says maybe we should run for a third term, you know, especially when he said it multiple times. Like he's not being facetious there. He is seriously considering that.
And
Um,
we're gonna link to a post by a like minor like analyst that I like, that makes a point of like people can't lie, by which he doesn't mean literally people can't lie, but people really struggle to lie about their core values or their intrinsic motivations. And so if we look at like what Anthropic, the entity, and also the people at Anthropic might actually believe, they split up OpenAI specifically because they, to some level, like were unhappy with the AI safety there,
yeah.
and their whole advertising, branding, like everything is aligned with caring to some degree. So it still is a bit surprising that they actually that's not all bullshit, but it's not completely unthinkable. But yeah, we found the red line. This is what they meant with like ethical AI.
Yeah, I think that's important to say too is like they are about safety, but the safety is then defined in the way that they define it, which of course it is. But in this case, I would say it's very explicitly about um, safety from the existential risk Skynet style scenarios.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's important to point out like the two red lines: mass surveillance of within America and autonomous weapons is literally just don't do Terminator.
yeah. So I think that's like that's worth acknowledging. Another thing that I think is interesting as an example of this, they just might mean it. Um, in this case study is Dario's leaked memo, because this is kind of like a sneak peek into the actual state, what he's actually thinking. because obviously this situation has pissed him off, right? Like, it is costing money. It is costing way more time than what he allotted for it, for certain. Um, and it's irritating to have to deal with incompetence as well, which is what I would describe as the Department of Defense, at least at the level that he is dealing with it, which is Hegseth. No statements on the rest of the Department of Defense, but I will say that Hegseth is incompetent. And so he said something along the lines of Trump being or the government being what was the word? Do you remember the word?
Mendacious.
Mendacious, which is a word, is a choice that Dario Amodei would make. But that is what Dario said when he believed there was a little bit more safety in being able to say that, right? Because it's an internal memo. He doesn't expect it to go public. And he's not trying to lie there, but then publicly he walks it back. Still, that's like an example of I think we can I think we can be relatively confident that Dario probably does think that Trump is being mendacious.
We will get deeper into this later as well when we go like into like how can you figure this out like systematically. But the next thing is maybe like what people are more easily gonna believe when we point it for like companies' behavior. That's like
Mm-hmm.
rational self-interest. Like if you're a nerd and you know like you listen to his podcast, so you probably are, then
Mm-hmm.
large corporations are interesting because they're the closest thing we have to like fully rational actors, or like countries are like another candidate. So they will actually do the game theory shit, and that means you get to like apply all of the different game theory techniques and like overthinking things to them. And then if you do that, you actually see there's a bunch of good reasons why you might want to do what Anthropic as the entity did. Number one, connecting a bit to the original like motivation, like if you have spent your whole existence hiring people with like we are the good AI company, we might pay less than OpenAI, which I'm not even sure that is true, but like let's
I
assume
don't think
it,
that's
like let's assume or like we might have less money, so it's a bit less certain. I think that is like an actual thing.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
at least in the beginning, they were the underdog. They don't have 80% of a market share. People don't say, I asked my ChatGPT when they talk to, like people don't know Claude out of coding.
You mean people don't say I'll ask Claude, people say I'll ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. And all of that stuff is like a thing they had to like, or still have to fight against. And they use this, we are the good guys heavily. And so number
Mm-hmm.
one is like the people that they have hired probably to a good degree go there because of also the culture from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
and
then
and they also very intentionally recruit out of that culture as well. So there's a whole
yeah,
another sort of can of worms there. But it does mean that if they were to make a decision on a corporate level that very blatantly goes against those stated shared values, they could have a legitimate issue in terms of people leaving. And given the salaries that they are paying, the time it takes to train people up, and the importance of time in especially in their framing of the world, it's likely that that is actually worth far more than the amount that they could possibly lose as a result of this decision.
yeah, also in terms of opportunity cost, that like if there's like one team that is like well tuned and they're like working on like a thing that is gonna work well, or like it can make Claude dance, then replacing that costs a lot. And they are already struggling with this. That like one of their researchers quit in a very like public letter, basically saying that like it was like Marinak Sharma. I apologize for the name mangling. Who had led the safeguards research team. He quit and said
Mm.
he's gonna like study poetry now, and he hopes to be braver than he was before. Um,
Every time I hear about these people, I always feel so bad. Like the world that they live in is
yeah, anxiety
fraught.
driven. When
Yeah.
I when I
But anyway, sorry, please
when I
continue.
remind myself how much money they make, and I will say kind of like if anybody from Anthropic OpenAI is watching this and is like very anxious about AGI, come talk to me. My rates are very affordable. I can try to like reason you out of your anxiety. There's hope that I can sell you for a very reasonable price. Uh,
Yeah.
but the other aspect is that all of these guys have a lot of money. After a while, so like you
Yeah.
need to actually keep the story up. And so you need to at least be able to plausibly sell that you're still a good guys. And if you cross all of your red lines in very quick succession, you don't have time to like, boil the frog and like point at like, oh, we have to do this. So even if you assume that they are all like snakes at the C-suite, at some point they have to like draw like a token line, and you could hope that okay, maybe these two lines are small enough that they're not gonna explode at us for this. So that could be like the calculus that is being done.
But at the same time, they did, I think on like the 23rd or the 24th of February, also say that they were removing some of the safeguards in their like responsible scaling policy. I think specifically the commitment to have safeguards in place prior to training the model is something that they removed. So also I'm sure that that was a longer process involved. That wasn't a decision that was made that day. So that was in the works for a month or so at least. Um, Meaning they can't really stop that at that point. And now they've been given this other very critical decision on a similar topic with a short deadline, meaning it has to happen around the same time. That could also be involved. Although there were also people saying that potentially that was in response to this scuffle and was trying to appease them, which maybe is the case as well.
I don't know. Yeah, that's for me. That's a bit like orthogonal to the overall topic there. Um,
Yeah, it was just a side note.
Another aspect that I don't think they saw coming, but that might have like fed into their like calculus for the first point was we will put a screenshot of a status page that I grabbed like a few days ago. You can see in the reliability of Claude Code and Claude.ai and all of the Anthropic pages and APIs. When the US government chose to give Anthropic billions of dollars of advertising spend equivalent of marketing, and triggered
Yeah.
a massive inflow of people who reacted to the tweets of Hexet, who said, I'm paraphrasing a bit, and we will try to find the tweets, but like he said two things. One, how dare you be so ethical? We must have the authority to spy on Americans. Anthropic refusing to allow us this is horrible. And two, this is critical technology. We cannot act at our best capacity. Like we need to have this. It's kind of this pin that we said earlier about the um, supply chain risk and the Defense Production Act. Like this is like half of that pin. Like saying that you're so critical that you're necessary for the war effort, and you're so ethical that you refuse to let us find the Americans. Like you couldn't have made a better gift to any like company that wrangles people's private data if you tried.
Yeah, like standing up to the DoD, the best advertising money can't buy. Right? You need to get in some sort of aggressive confrontation in order to get that kind of advertising, and it is worth a lot of money.
This is like after OpenAI did like the previous record of like announcing that they would be adding ads and Anthropic like capitalizing on that, but they didn't even need to do a Super Bowl ad for this one. But I don't think they were gambling on that. I think this was like a nice like softening of the damage that this took. I think
Mm-hmm.
they were hoping that the DoD wouldn't do this, and this is just like a nice like free win for them.
And then the last area also sort of, at least in how I'm thinking about this motivation, also blends with the realpolitik. Although, correct me if I'm misunderstanding here. But essentially,
The
like at a certain point, you need to be able to demonstrate that there is a line, um, and that you won't cross it, and that line should probably be informed by something that is like actually you think is bad. Um, but then simply having that line and standing firm at it is what allows you to play ball with the likes of Trump, because it's been very well established at this point, if you give him an inch, he will take a mile. And so at a certain point you have to stop giving him an inch.
Yeah, so this is the realpolitik one, connected a little bit to this like establishing yourself as a responsible frontier lab, kind of like like committing to your brand, like actually like showing people, okay, like what we're doing actually means something, is a bit like this. Like at some point you need to put up, right? Like you need to show that this has some meat behind it. And the last one that is more on like rational self-interest, is one of the ways autocrats or con men try to like get a leverage on you is by making you commit a crime together.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, you know, like you invest together, and if people snitch on you, or if like it goes down bad, then it's also their neck. So they are now invested in also keeping like, you know, the con going. And it might be fully rational if Anthropic has like an assessment that, you know, just bombing Iran without Congress approval uh, might be a tad bit illegal, and participating in things like mass surveillance of Americans and autonomous weapons without supervision might also be illegal. And if you're not like credibly putting up resistance, you're co-liable to that if there's ever an investigation. And the U.S. government is going to be fine, and probably like the president has immunity, but you don't. So there's a reason to at some point say, "Nah, we're not gonna do that. Actually, like we're sitting this one out."
And I see that. So I that was the one that I was tying to realpolitik in a way. It's a different, it's a slightly different motivation there. You know, it's protecting your own skin as opposed to um, trying to establish that you can essentially have a seat at the table. But they're very intertwined in this case. Um, and
Yeah, like
so I think that,
realpolitik is basically rational self-interest aimed at power plays.
yeah.
It's kind of that you're like very like pragmatic, ruthless, beyond even just normal behavior, and you see you push it to the extreme, basically.
So are you saying that you would disagree with what I'm saying?
No, I'm agreeing. I'm just like giving my connection of how
Okay.
these things tie together. And I just wanted to like give people like a concrete example of like a past company that probably wishes that like their execs had acted like this, which is Arthur Anderson, which some people might
Yeah.
be too young to know about. But right now there's the big four auditing and accounting companies. It used to be the big five. And it's no longer the big five because Arthur Anderson went down with Enron because they didn't have like enough internal resistance against going along with a con, and they were held liable. So that could be part of why either individuals or Anthropic as an entity did what they did.
And then also looking at their reaction, it's not just how they behaved or their track record here, but it's also how the environment around them behaved, how their peers behaved. Um, so like at this point, I believe all of the remaining uh, frontier labs, so to speak, have backed up, including OpenAI, which opportunistically uh, took the DoD deal as soon as Anthropic was designated a supply chain risk. So, including the one that's ready and I'm sure foaming at the mouth to get one up on their competitor, they also threw in with them and backed this sort of, oh, yeah, we don't think that this is lawful. Uh, so I think that's telling in itself as well, right? That they took advantage of the situation, but it is still not in their best interest for OpenAI or for Anthropic to lose this lawsuit. So, given these motivations, though, it's important to think about why the like what is informing our understanding of these motivations. Why are we saying, yeah, we think these things that we just listed are playing a role in their decision? Like where do you go to look at that?
Yeah, and like how do you trust certain things is maybe like the other question that's implicitly there, right? I don't think people emotionally have problems like thinking that corporations are self-interested and out for power, but they actually believe it might be a thing that people want to like know. Okay, like how do you know?
Sure, and I also think that, I mean, the goals that are being pursued are not necessarily what what's being stated, even if like you are willing to treat a company or a corporation as a rational actor. A rational actor with a different goal might not behave in the same way. So how do you suss out what those goals are, or what those I guess like believe it's cases are, if that makes sense.
Yes. So like the usual kind of like thing to point at there is what's called credible commitments. And this comes from the work of a game theorist or economist called Schelling. Uh, and the idea is basically like the branch is called signaling theory. The idea is that talk is cheap, but you can invest talk with like credibility by making it costly for you. And it doesn't necessarily need
Mhm.
to be like literal like money cost, but it can also be like irreversible um, PR damage. That's where how it works like for humans.
Yeah, and I think this is intuited relatively well by humans in just like our day-to-day lives. Um, the person that you trust, you do not trust them because they said that they would do something. You trust them because there is an established history, whether that is in a small subset of consequential moments or a very, very long history of smaller instances. They have accrued this value of signal that they should be trusted. And so it's the same way with corporations, except we can't. The accrual doesn't make as much sense here. Uh, and instead, what makes more sense is what are the things that are actually binding? What are the things that we can tell um, is the case? So, like Anthropic said in, um, well, Anthropic said they lost 10 billion um, in deals, I think, and that's a lot of money. So this is actually costly for them.
And this I think they
That
predicted.
yes, um, and we're also not just taking that at face value because that itself was in a court document, uh, which has more weight to it necessarily, right? If they lied in that, that could completely destroy their case. So we can be relatively certain that that is actually representative of what the case is.
In German, there's a nice imagery there. We say that you can put weight on a statement. So in
Mm-hmm.
English, it just goes into like reliable as a statement. Like the statement holds up to pressure, basically. And like if your statement can get you into jail or can terminate a lawsuit that you're trying to do to like stave off a possibly like business killing designation as a supply chain risk, then that is a like reliable statement, and it's more reliable than like a tweet that doesn't have any legal force behind it.
Yeah.
And another uh, worked example of credible statements is Jacob. What makes you
uh,
credible?
yeah. I mean, I guess the the fact that I'm sharing my opinion uh makes me harder to employ. At least I would say within this space because it does not coincide with the opinion of many of the people hiring. So I promise it's a good thing that I'm harder to employ and I'm not just
Or your credibility? Like this has like this is also important to say. Like this does not mean that the statement on its own is reliable in the like quality or like accuracy statement, right? Like this is more like you actually believe in what you're saying. Independently of that, you're very smart and educated and you know what you're doing, but that is a separate evaluation. This is about like does Jacob actually believe the things we say on this podcast, and also me, and also like another person to point out is Timnit. Like the reason why I respect Timnit a lot and like I trust Timnit in the sense that like she seems to genuinely mean the things she says, and I put weight to what she says, is she killed a very lucrative career by being very annoying about actually having ethics.
yeah. And that
So yeah,
I think like leads relatively well into the next idea, which is look at whether the organization is walking the walk and not just walking the walk once, but walking the walk as a pattern.
this is a thing for organizations and for people, but we split them a bit because you do need to weight things a bit differently, but it's the same idea. And for abstract systems or entities, the principle is called posuit, or the purpose of a system is what it does. This is from the 70s, so this is like an OG out there acronym. This is a principle formulated by Stafford Bear, who was like a systems theorist or cyberneticist. And it's really just like, okay, like if you want to understand like why does a system exist and how does it keep existing and what is its purpose, then you should look what it actually like achieves in the world and like how it keeps existing. And so if you have a system that officially is meant to like create wealth for everyone, but it actually creates wealth for only a few select few, then the actual purpose is not what is stated, but what you observe. And this is a bit different than credible commitments, where you really like sacrifice things in order to show the signal. Here, it's just about okay, like if there's a continuous pattern that points into one thing being the goal, then you can just assume that is the goal until you get any other evidence to the contrary. And now is the remainder of a pin from earlier, which is the supply chain risk designation an actual belief of the US government or of Hexet or of Trump? Do they really think that Anthropic is dangerous to the US?
Right. And what I believe is that of course not. It is being used as a punishment. It is being used as a sort of cudgel in order to try to get them to stay in line. And the reason that I believe that is because there is an abundance of evidence that that is the case. The fact that they opened with either we're going to designate you a supply chain risk and remove you from uh, all of our workflows, all of our technologies, or we're going to say that your technology is so critical to the defense of our nation that we're going to nationalize you and take it. those are not statements that can live together. Those don't make sense as a two suggestions or two threats as to what will happen for the same reason, unless the whole point is the punishment.
Small nitpick. I don't think Defense Protection or Production Act is technically nationalization. It's more like government tells you what to produce, but because this is freedom country, it's still yours, and you will get it back after the war.
Okay, soft nationalization.
I mean, this distinction does matter for this point, right? Because if it was nationalization, then you swap out all of the people, and you can um, diffuse the supply chain risk that was there before. But because that's not how this works, that there's no inherent thing that we will swap out all of the decision makers, all of the people who might have constituted the supply chain risk previously. It's just telling you what to do. That's what makes this a hint that this is bullshit and this is a cudgel. At least one aspect of it is this.
And then another aspect is I don't know if it was a leaked memo or it just is put out publicly. I forget. But the way that they are rolling out this removal of anthropic products from their workflows is that the entire military is given 6 months to remove it, and they can apply for an exemption within that period. And I don't think that that is the kind of behavior that we would see if there was actually a concern about it being a national security risk.
One would hope so.
Well, yeah, I hope so. Um, I'd be curious to know if maybe I'll look this up later, but I feel like the ban on TikTok on government people's phones had a shorter turnaround than that. Which, to be fair, it is an easier thing to remove, but still, yeah, the level of urgency that is brought to the table does not indicate that it actually matters that much. Another thing that I just wanted to bring up around this idea is that Anthropic says it's worried about safety and then partners with Palantir, right? And they pioneered computer use and they've quietly walked back safety pledges. These are examples of what they've done. And I think that should also be taken into account here. So what's you mentioned earlier that there is another framing for people?
Yeah, so for systems, it's about purpose and dynamics and how things are structured, which is kind of no matter how you try to work a system, it can't really go against its purpose. Like a knife that remains a good knife is not a good hammer or a good bandage. There's intrinsically opposing properties there. With people, it's really more about what do people want to do, and part of that is then just about the consistency and the way people act, but it's also about the positive thing just on a human scale. And one direct example is Sam jumping at the opportunity of cutting a deal is exactly what you would expect. But it's also exactly what you would expect, that he will lie and misrepresent and try to have it both ways in the announcement. So after they failed to cut a deal with Anthropic, OpenAI jumped into the breach and announced that they were able to cut a deal despite having the exact same safeguards as Anthropic. And then people were like, what? How? Are you sure you have the same safeguards? And then OpenAI said, yes, we also want only lawful behavior, which is the same thing as Anthropic. And people were like, no, Anthropic was a bit more specific because this is the government. They can just claim it's lawful. What do you do then? And then there was like awkward silence, and then a little bit later they amended the deal, or they claimed to have amended it, but the actual like observable behavior is like, okay, OpenAI cuts the deal, and then they walk it back. Anthropic says no, and then they try to like make that workable, and these are two different behaviors. And also on the level of the people, I don't think Sam, like, this is also like a testament to Sam being a better player at this than Dario. I don't think Sam wrote a memo like that, even when he was very pissed. I have never heard through any rumor mill anything like that of Sam. And stuff like this shows you indirectly and with lots of like wide confidence intervals what people actually care about.
Yeah.
Also, Sam being extremely triggered by the Anthropic counter ads is one of those examples. Like, and you really need to integrate all this and try to look at things not like you do in the positive case on the systems level as rational actors, but as boundedly rational. Like with humans, you're trying to see what makes them tick on a emotional level, because that's usually what people underestimate drives decision making. There's also a last way of like getting a better read on situation and understanding motivations, which is kind of related to both the things we just talked about, and that's if you can get it insider info.
So I sort of see this as like a special case for both of these, like the revealed preferences and Posywid. Um, Basically, it's extra information that indicates something about the actor. And so maybe an employee has insider information about the dynamics or the rules or the stated goals internally but not externally, and that in itself is valuable. So yeah, that in itself is valuable because you are opening up and understanding someone who has a better understanding of the system, and they're saying, oh no, this is actually how it behaves, why we're doing this thing, etc. um and then the other is for people. I mean, insider knowledge is really just like how they react, right? Like intuitions. And some of this is, I mean, obviously is a noisy process, but it can be still valuable here.
Yeah, and at least in my extended circle, like I don't know anybody who works at Anthropic, but I know people or who talk to people, and consistently I hear like the same like secondhand things that people are genuinely anxious about AGI and Skynet and shit
Mhm.
like that, and people genuinely care about not being evil, and they are very like internally torn, which is also why they need so much money to like keep them like rooted on one place. So that's part of why I buy it to a large degree. When something like as at least being partially intrinsic motivation.
Okay. So before we close out, I think it would be helpful to just do like a lightning round of what we've said and like roughly what this sort of approach is. And it starts with like naming your lens or your framework of analysis.
Yeah, and we picked this pragmatic lens where we just look at things like with what effect they will have, and it's maybe informative to contrast with this with Timnit's lens, which was like a moralist is a loaded word, but it is very much a moral lens where she looks at the situation and she doesn't see what we see, at least in her post, because she doesn't care about it. Like her analysis focuses on different things in the way it is stated, and by making it explicit, you can keep yourself honest about like possible blind spots that you might be having.
And then the first thing to do after establishing that is look at binding documents. So this is essentially where are the credible commitments in court documents, in case filings, in financial disclosures, in use agreements? What are the ways that people are actually making something binding, saying something binding? Because those are going to be the most valuable and the most trustworthy signals. And along those lines, following the money is also valuable, right? Because I mean, the money is a proxy for power, I guess. So who is paying whom? Uh, why are they paying them? If you can figure that out, and if not, who precisely is paying whom? Uh, because oftentimes that can give a lot more insight into how a person got to where they are or why an organization is behaving a certain way than one might initially expect.
Yeah, and then all of these things give you like individual data points, but the important thing is that stuff is a bit consistent over time. Like everyone can be like nice once, but if people are continuously drawing lines, even if they're like small lines, that gives you like a direction to go from. And then another consistency check there is kind of like, does it make sense how their peers or foes react? So like in an Anthropic's case, like them being backed up by all of the peers, it's partially self-interest, but it's also because like nobody genuinely thinks that this is a supply chain risk, and they all know it's a cudgel and they want to like avoid the cudgel.
Yeah. And then going back to the beginning, when sharing, name your lens again, because this establishes like credibility and a little bit of understanding as to how you're approaching this problem, and know why you're making a claim. So for all of these things that we've said, we've been giving the reasoning behind it, and I think that that is quite valuable. Just going through the exercise of making yourself have a why there.
And I think it's important to say that like this is basically just like a small part of the investigative journalism and critical analysis and media studies toolkit. Like there are a lot of different traditions of how you do assessments like this, and they all like follow roughly the patterns that we outlined. And we'll put up some additional reading links for this stuff. It was all.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So hopefully that will give you something else to help make sense of all this AI muck that's out there. But that's what we can take for this week. If you thought this was valuable, please subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And with that, we'll see you next time.